Hello, my name is Luis Zapata, and this is a presentation for Inferno Music Conference and Festival in Oslo, Norway. Rock and roll has been the soundtrack of youth rebellion for almost 8 decades. It is probably America's most powerful cultural export to the world. It may seem cliche to say rock and roll is more than just music, but it is. The moment it took a hold of the spirit of a post war generation of American teenagers, the youth would never be the same again. The youth started thinking outside the box and rejecting parental expectations. The rejection of the status quo would eventually generate major accelerated technological advancement. America in the 1940s was a different country. This is the Artie Shaw Orchestra doing a rendition of a song by Cole Porter called Let's Begin the Begging. Performers are clean cut and very well dressed. Audiences remain seated and quiet throughout the musical number. Well, rock and roll is gonna mess the whole thing up. Where does rock and roll begin? Well, etymologically, the first time that the term seems to be folklorically used is with the revivalist churches. People attending churches in the early 20th century in Los Angeles would start rolling on the floor and speaking in tongues and doing guttural sounds and all of that. And people would say, hey, what's going on inside that building? And the answer would be, okay, well, they are rock and rolling. Revivalist churches were very important because they allowed people from different color of skin to get together and worship together. And that gives us to the next point, which is when does sonically it starts. Possibly, definitely, is music that comes from the churches, from the African American Baptist churches. Probably the first major star for this music is Sister Rosetta Thorpe. It's a direct connection between gospel and rock and roll. Other people say it's probably Professor Longhair. I like the idea that it's Ike Turner and the Alabama Police Department, which broke their amplifiers, and so with the cracked cones they distorted and they rushed through their sets, and the people like it, so they incorporated that sound into their a signature sound for the Ike Turner band. Another important technological advancement in rock and roll is that radios became this small. And so you could muffle it with a pillow and listen in clandestinely to DJs that were forbidden by parents, such as Alan Freed or Wolfman Jack, or in Austin, Texas, La Vera Durst. Before that, radios were a big piece of furniture that sat in the living room where families would congregate around and develop tastes together. I like to think that rock and roll, because it requires a certain attitude to differentiate from other musical genres, began with Marlon Brando. In 1953, in the movie The Wild One, when his character is asked, what are you rebelling against? He answers, what you've got. Urban planning in America determined that home loans were given away based on skin color and ancestry. Poor Jews and African Americans and Latinx congregated in the same neighborhoods and interacted together. From the combination of jump blues that was loved by greasers and mambo, which was loved by suk suk pachucos, and African American rhythms, the first hit comes out, which is Tequila by the Champs. This is 1958. It beats by 2 months the music of Richie Valens with La Bamba, and eventually Valens and the Big Whopper and Buddy Holly die in a plane crash. It's in 1959. Elvis goes to the army, and so DJs at the time would say rock and roll is dead. However, in 1958, a Shawnee Link Bray has a hit with Rumble. Rumble becomes the only instrumental song ever banned on radio. Steve Van Zandt from the E Street Band considers that Link Bray wrote the juvenile delinquency anthem. This music has a very strong influence on Jimmy Page, Tommy Iommi, Pete Townsend, and others that will carry the torch of hard rock music. In the 1960s, rock and roll takes two marked directions. One is the folk, acoustic, wooden sounds of musicians such as Bob Dylan and Richie Havens. And the other one is the electrically charged sounds of the British invasion, delivered by the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, and half Cherokee guitar god Jimi Hendrix, who gained fame after moving to England. Hendrix expands the sound and the language of guitar and uses in both his bands, the Band of Gypsies and Experience, drumming that is reminiscent of Native American patterns. One of the important aspects and notions of the British invasion is that rock and roll didn't need the roll anymore, it could just rock. Such notion was expressed by bands such as Led Zeppelin, The Who, Humble Pie, and Black Sabbath. For many, the first heavy metal band with dramatic performances and distorted guitars and anti-establishment messages. In the 1970s, half Cherokee New Yorker Ace Frehley becomes the quintessential heavy metal guitar player for the band Kiss. Kiss sells millions of tickets and records around the world, and the influence of Ace Frehley will be absolutely significant in the next generations of guitar players. Commercial radio shied away from bands such as Wasp, led by the often controversial Blackfoot Blackie Lawless. However, in November 1983, a Los Angeles band which had Rudy Sarzo from Cuba on bass and Mexico City-born Carlos Cavazo on guitar, called Quiet Riot, displaces the Police Synchronicity album from the #1 position in the Billboard 200 albums. And their single, Come and Feel the Noise, a remake of Slade's, becomes the first heavy metal song to get into the top 5 of the charts. The success of Quiet Riot propels other bands, such as Twisted Sisters, with New Yorican Eddie Ojeda on guitar and vocals, Juan Croucier with Rat, Mexican-American Robert Trujillo with Suicidal Tendencies, and eventually with Metallica, and of course, Chilean Tom Araya and Cuban Dave Lombardo from Slayer. One of the biggest bands in the world in the 90s was Rage Against the Machine, fronted by Mexican-American Zack de la Rocha, a very political band. Zack made clear his support for insurgents in Third World. For example, he was a strong supporter of the FMLN in El Salvador. Another band was Brujeria, formed in 1989. Initially had Dino Cazares, Raymond Herrera, and Jello Biafra. Cazares and Herrera will form Fear Factory. Tampa, Florida had a very strong grindcore and death metal scene. One of the biggest bands was Terrorizer and Morbid Angel. The drummer is, of course, Pete Sandoval. Pete is considered the father of the blast beat. A very fast drumming pattern that is reminiscent of the Machine Gun. Black metal probably began with Venom in Newcastle, England, an openly anti-Christian outfit. Their philosophy was taken by Scandinavian kids who consider Christianity to be an invading culture. That philosophy is also taken root in Latin America, creating indigenous metal and Rez metal. Rez metal normally takes place in Navajo reservations. It's a very angry anti-Christian, which represents pride and the fight for dignity. In places such as Guadalajara, Semican is a band that sings in Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, which is spoken still in the southwest part of the United States. And Nahuatl means all alive. They use Nahuatl instruments, and they have already played at Hellfest and Wacken Open Air. I would like to conclude this presentation dedicating it to Chippewa, Randy Castillo, who drummed for Motley Crue, Lita Ford, and Ozzy Osbourne, and who was taken away too young in 2002 by cancer. Also, I would like to conclude saying that just like African Americans protected their heritage using rock and roll, I believe the Native Americans are doing the same with heavy metal. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy it, and hopefully I will see you in Oslo in 2021. Take care.